Have you ever found yourself looking at the world around you and feeling that something just doesn't fit? As if everyone is following an invisible script, chasing goals that seem important, but somehow sound like a massive collective play? It's that unsettling feeling that arises when you stop for a moment in the middle of everyday busyness and ask yourself, why are we all doing this? Why do we wake up every day, fulfill our obligations, seek success and recognition, consume endlessly as if our lives depended on it? And perhaps the most disturbing question, does it really matter? This feeling is not a flaw in you. It's not a personality defect or an inability to adapt to society. On the contrary, it's a glimpse of a fundamental truth about our contemporary condition that few are willing to face directly. For thousands of years, we humans lived immersed in grand narratives that gave meaning to our existence, whether through ancient mythologies, organized religions, or more recently, political and economic ideologies. We always had collective stories that offered us purpose, direction, and a sense of belonging. These narratives told us who we were, where we came from, and where we were supposed to go. They answered the great existential questions every human being inevitably faces. What is the purpose of my existence? What happens after death? How should I live a good life? What is good and evil? The ancient Egyptians lived by the belief that life was a preparation for eternity and that their actions would be judged after death. The Greeks believed in a cosmos ordered by gods who directly intervened in human affairs. Medieval Europe was dominated by the Christian vision of a world created by God, where each individual should seek eternal salvation. In the 20th century, great ideologies such as communism and capitalism offered comprehensive visions of how society should be organized and what the role of the individual should be within it. I'm not here to judge whether these narratives were true or false. The crucial point is that they worked. They provided a framework of meaning that allowed individuals to orient their lives and find purpose in their daily actions. They connected generations within a common and coherent project. A medieval peasant might have been extremely poor by today's material standards, but he lived in a universe full of meaning. Every action, no matter how mundane, was part of a larger story that gave it purpose. But something extraordinary happened over the last 2 centuries, and more dramatically in recent decades. These great narratives began to crumble, one after another. Modern science, with its unprecedented explanatory power, corroded the foundations of traditional religious worldviews. The traumatic experiences of the 20th century world wars, holocausts, and totalitarian regimes deeply shook faith in progress and in the secular ideologies that promised a utopian future. What emerged from this process was not a new grand narrative, but rather a vacuum of meaning. An empty space quickly filled not by a coherent new story about who we are and where we are headed as a species, but by something much simpler and ultimately unsatisfying: consumerism and the relentless pursuit of immediate individual satisfaction. Here we reach the inconvenient truth that conscious people begin to perceive, but most prefer to ignore. We are living in an age of meaning collapse. A time when the old narratives that sustain the collective sense of purpose have fragmented and no new coherent vision has emerged to replace them. Instead, we fill this void with elaborate distractions, with the accumulation of experiences and possessions, with a frantic chase for stimuli that keep us entertained enough not to face the underlying existential emptiness. Look around you. What does our contemporary culture offer as an answer to the great existential questions? Live in the moment, be yourself, follow your dreams, enjoy life to the fullest. There are vague, individualistic mantras that ultimately answer nothing substantial. They tell us nothing about our place in the cosmos, about our relationship with others, about what constitutes a well-lived life beyond the satisfaction of momentary desires. What we have instead is a culture obsessed with infinite economic growth, with ever-accelerating technological progress, with the accumulation of material goods and experiences we can display on social media. All of this without any deep reflection about where we are actually going or why. The real epiphany, the truth that few are willing to confront, is that most of us are living in a state of veiled existential confusion. We run faster and faster without knowing where we are going. We produce and consume on an unprecedented scale without questioning whether it truly brings lasting fulfillment. We lose ourselves in digital worlds and escapist fantasies because reality, stripped of transcendent meaning, has become unbearably dry. Maybe you felt it. That moment when you achieve a goal you worked years for, only to realize the satisfaction lasts just a few days before the emptiness returns. Or when you acquire the item you so deeply desired, only for your interest in it to fade almost immediately. Or when you scroll through your social media feed for hours, only to feel more empty and disconnected than before. These are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are symptoms of a broader cultural illness, a crisis of meaning that affects not just isolated individuals, but our entire civilization. The most insidious aspect of this crisis is that it comes disguised as abundance. Never in human history have we had so many entertainment options, so many consumption possibilities, so many ways to communicate. It's easy to confuse this material and informational abundance with existential wealth. It's easy to think that because we can choose between thousands of products, shows, and careers, we are somehow freer or more fulfilled than our ancestors. But the truth is that this abundance of options often masks a poverty of purpose. The freedom to choose among countless distractions is not the same as the freedom to build a meaningful life. Technology has amplified this dynamic to unprecedented levels. Our smartphones and computers connect us to an endless stream of information, entertainment, and social stimuli. They are meticulously designed to capture and hold our attention. Every notification, every infinite scroll of content, every like received releases small doses of dopamine that keep us engaged. We have developed an almost addictive relationship with our devices precisely because they temporarily fill that void of meaning. Let's be honest. How many hours a day do you spend consuming digital content without any clear purpose? Scrolling aimlessly, jumping from video to video, from post to post, in an endless search for what exactly, if you stop to reflect, you'll realize that much of this behavior isn't really driven by genuine interest in the content itself, but by a desire to escape the discomfort of emptiness, the lack of purpose, the feeling that we should be doing something more meaningful with our time, but don't know exactly what. This is the great irony of our age. We are simultaneously more connected and more isolated than ever. We have access to more information than any previous generation, but less and less wisdom. We have more entertainment options, but less genuine joy. We have more means of communication, but shallower conversations. We have more friends online, but more superficial relationships. And all this because we're trying to fill with distractions and superficial connections a void that actually demands something much deeper, authentic meaning. And here lies the central paradox. The more we try to fill that void with external stimuli and distractions, the more that void seems to grow. It's like trying to quench thirst by drinking salt water. Every attempt to find lasting satisfaction through consumption, social status, passive entertainment, or even conventional professional success only intensifies the sense that something essential is missing. This situation is not accidental. It's the predictable result of an economic and social system that fundamentally depends on our perpetual discontent. Contemporary capitalism thrives by creating and then exploiting a constant sense of inadequacy and desire. Modern advertising doesn't just sell products, it sells identities, lifestyles, the promise that the next purchase, the next experience, the next upgrade will finally bring the satisfaction we seek, but that promise is structurally impossible to fulfill. Because if we ever truly found lasting satisfaction, if we ever said, I have enough, the entire system would collapse. The infinite economic growth that sustains our societal model requires that we are never fully content, that we always want more, that we are perpetually chasing the next thing that's supposed to fill the void. The result is a society of permanently dissatisfied individuals running faster and faster on a treadmill that leads nowhere, chasing a fulfillment that is structurally designed to remain forever out of reach. And here we reach a crucial point. This system not only fails to meet our deepest existential needs, but is also endangering the very habitability of the planet. The pursuit of infinite economic growth on a finite planet is a mathematical impossibility. The Earth's ecological limits are becoming painfully evident through climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource depletion. We are therefore facing a double crisis, a crisis of meaning on an individual and cultural level, and an ecological crisis on a planetary level. And the most remarkable thing is that both have the same root: our collective inability to articulate a purpose, a sense of direction that goes beyond material accumulation and perpetual economic growth. The truth that conscious people are beginning to see is that we cannot continue on this path, that this model of civilization, based on infinite growth and consumption as a substitute for meaning, not only leaves us existentially empty, but is actively destroying the ecological foundations that sustain our survival as a species. What makes this truth so difficult to accept is that it demands a radical rethinking of virtually every aspect of how we organize our society and our individual lives. We are not talking about small adjustments or incremental reforms. We are talking about a fundamental transformation in our relationship with consumption, technology, work, success, and ultimately with meaning itself. I need to pause for a moment and ask you directly, which aspect of this reality we're discussing most awakens your fear or apprehension? That feeling that perhaps everything you've been chasing isn't truly what you need? I know that often we keep these concerns to ourselves, perhaps afraid of seeming out of place in a world that celebrates the relentless pursuit of material success and status. But your worries are valid and probably shared by more people than you realize. Share in the comments. My greatest fear about the existential emptiness of modern life is your voice can help create a space where we can honestly discuss these collective fears instead of suppressing them. And perhaps by naming these fears together, we can begin to imagine ways to face them. The truth is, on some level, we all know that something is deeply wrong. Even those who appear most fully integrated into the current system, who display all the outward markers of success, often experience what we might call moments of existential clarity. Moments when the curtain drops and they see, even briefly, the emptiness underlying everything they've been pursuing. It's that late night moment when the successful executive wonders whether his life truly has any higher purpose, or when the celebrity adored by millions looks in the mirror and doesn't recognize the person staring back. These moments are usually brief and frightening. Most people quickly repress them and return to the comfort of distractions and conventional narratives. But they are also precious opportunities, windows into a deeper truth, chances to awaken to a more authentic form of existence. What would happen if, instead of fleeing from these moments, we began to inhabit them consciously? If we allowed existential discomfort to teach us something about what truly matters? If we used the feeling of emptiness not as something to be filled with more distractions, but as a call toward a deeper search? Historically, moments of collective existential crisis have often preceded great cultural and spiritual transformations. It was amid the collapse of the certainties of the ancient world that the great world religions emerged. It was in the social and intellectual turbulence of the late Middle Ages that the Renaissance and later the Enlightenment arose. Perhaps we are living through a similar moment, a gap between worlds, where the old narratives no longer work, but the new ones have not yet fully crystallized. There are signs that something new is emerging. Across the world, people are experimenting with ways of life that challenge the dominant logic of consumerism and infinite growth. Intentional communities, voluntary simplicity movements, returns to nature, rediscoveries of traditional spiritual practices, new forms of economic organization based on cooperation rather than competition. These experiences are still marginal, true, but they point to possibilities of social organization and meaning that go beyond the current paradigm. At the same time, we are witnessing a renewed interest in wisdom traditions long marginalized by Western modernity. Contemplative practices such as meditation and mindfulness, once considered exotic, are now adopted even at the heart of corporate capitalism, albeit often in diluted and instrumentalized forms. We also see a growing interest in altered states of consciousness, whether through the rediscovery of psychedelic substances or through techniques such as holotropic breathwork or deep meditation. These states often provide direct experiences of connection and transcendent meaning that challenge the dominant materialistic and individualistic worldview. All of this suggests that even amid the apparent triumph of consumer materialism, something deeper is stirring within the collective consciousness a renewed search for meaning, for connection, for a form of existence that recognizes our deepest human needs. However, it would be naive to underestimate the obstacles to genuine transformation. The current system is not merely a set of economic or technological arrangements. It is a complex interweaving of power structures, incentives, identities, and narratives that fiercely resist change. Consider for a moment the enormous interests invested in maintaining the status quo. Giant corporations whose business models fundamentally depend on our continuous and ever-growing consumption, political systems, captured by those same economic interests, educational institutions that primarily prepare people to be productive workers and loyal consumers, not reflective citizens or whole human beings. More subtly, but just as powerfully, our very identities and sense of personal worth are intertwined with the current system. From childhood, we are socialized to define our value in terms of productivity, achievement, social status, and purchasing power. Challenging this system is not just a matter of changing external policies or institutions. It means confronting deeply ingrained aspects of how we define ourselves. And then there is the problem of complexity. We live in a global civilization of unprecedented scale and interdependence in human history. The problems we face, from the climate crisis to rising inequality, are overwhelmingly complex. There is no simple solution, no silver bullet, no single path toward a wiser and more sustainable society. Faced with such complexity, it is easy to fall into a kind of paralysis, to feel that the problems are so vast, the forces at play so powerful, that any individual action is meaningless. Or, equally dangerously, to fall for simplistic solutions that promise to fix everything but merely replace one totalizing ideology with another. The path forward, therefore, is not one grand unified solution, but a multiplicity of experiments, attempts, pilot projects, a diversity of approaches that together can begin to build the foundations of a wiser, fairer, and more sustainable civilization. For that, we must cultivate a quality particularly rare in our current world: epistemic humility, the ability to say, "I don't know," and truly mean it, to recognize the limits of our knowledge and understanding, to remain open to divergent perspectives and new evidence, to resist the temptation of premature certainties and overly simplified answers. We also need to develop the capacity to think across multiple scales simultaneously, to connect our individual daily choices and actions to the larger systems and structures shaping our world, to see how the personal and political, the individual and collective, the local and global are inextricably interwoven, and perhaps most importantly, we need to cultivate a sense of possibility and hope that does not depend on guarantees of success, a willingness to act even in the face of uncertainty, to experiment knowing that many attempts will fail, to plant seeds without knowing for sure whether we will see them bear fruit. It's easy, in the face of the magnitude of the challenges we face, to fall into paralyzing cynicism or into false hope based on miraculous technological solutions. The harder but truer path is to cultivate what philosopher Václav Havel called deep hope, not the expectation that everything will turn out well, but a commitment to the meaning and value of doing what is right regardless of the outcome. Because the truth is, we have no guarantees. We don't know whether we will succeed in transforming our civilization in time to avoid catastrophic consequences from the ecological and social crises already underway. We don't know whether new forms of collective meaning and purpose will emerge to replace the exhausted narratives of the past. We don't know whether today's marginal experiences and movements will become tomorrow's dominant structures. But we do know that the current path is unsustainable. We know that a system based on infinite growth on a finite planet is mathematically doomed. We know that a culture that replaces authentic meaning with consumption and distraction is producing an epidemic of psychological suffering, from anxiety and depression to addiction and suicide. And we also know that human beings possess an extraordinary capacity for change and adaptation. Throughout our history as a species, we have undergone countless cultural, technological, and social transformations. We have overcome challenges that once seemed insurmountable. We have reinvented our societies and ourselves again and again. Perhaps the most important thing to recognize is that this transformation is already happening. It's not something we must start from scratch. It is emerging now in countless places and in countless forms, often at the margins, far from the spotlight of mainstream media and the halls of power. It's happening in communities, rediscovering simpler, more nature-connected ways of living, in social entrepreneurs, creating business models based on regeneration rather than extraction, in educators reimagining schools as spaces for integral human development, not merely training grounds for the labor market, in artists crafting new narratives and visions of what could be possible. And it's happening in the hearts and minds of ordinary people who, like you, are beginning to question the fundamental assumptions of how we live, who are finding the courage to ask whether there's more to life than the endless pursuit of more, who are seeking ways to live with greater integrity, purpose, and genuine connection. This awakening is not a single event, but an ongoing process. It doesn't happen all at once, but in layers with regressions and breakthroughs. There are days when the illusion falls away completely, and we see with crystal clarity the hollow nature of the game we've been playing. And there are days when we are drawn back into old patterns, old conditioning, old stories. The important thing is not to judge ourselves for these fluctuations, not to expect perfection or instant transformation, to be gentle with ourselves and with one another as we navigate this challenging and unfamiliar territory, because the truth is, we are doing something extraordinarily difficult. We are trying to evolve consciously as a species. We are attempting to transform not just our technologies or institutions, but our very consciousness, our way of being in the world. Historically, such transformations have typically unfolded over long periods, driven by forces people barely understood. We are trying to do something different, to intentionally guide our own cultural and psychological evolution, aware of the challenges and possibilities involved. There are no detailed maps for this territory, no experts who can tell us exactly how to proceed. We are all, in a sense, learning as we go, improvising, experimenting, discovering together. And perhaps that is precisely what makes this moment so extraordinary, so full of possibilities. We are participating in one of the greatest adventures possible, the conscious reinvention of what it means to be human, of how to live together on this planet, of how to create meaning and purpose in a world where old certainties have dissolved. This is not an easy journey. It demands courage to confront uncomfortable truths, humility to recognize how much we do not know, patience to persist even when progress is slow or imperceptible, compassion for ourselves and others as we stumble, fail, and learn. But it is also a profoundly rewarding journey. There is a particular joy in awakening from illusion, in seeing through the games and distractions that once consumed so much of our attention and energy. There is a sense of spaciousness and freedom that arises when we stop trying to fill the void with more possessions, more achievements, more stimulation, and there is a deep satisfaction in beginning to live in greater alignment with more authentic and meaningful values. The truth is, we cannot predict exactly what the emerging world will look like. We cannot know for sure which new forms of social organization, which new economic systems, which new narratives of meaning will eventually replace the current ones. The future is being created now through the choices and actions of countless people, and its final shape is inherently unpredictable. But we can consciously participate in this creative process. We can contribute our own ideas, experiments, and visions. We can join others who are walking similar paths. We can be both witnesses and co-creators of this great transformation. And perhaps, in the end, this is the deepest truth that conscious people are beginning to perceive, that we are active participants in the evolution of our culture and collective consciousness, that our choices, actions, and ways of being in the world matter not only for our individual lives, but for the unfolding of human history itself. This is an enormous responsibility, of course. It is much easier to see oneself as a small piece in a system, too large to be influenced, to go with the flow, to accept the world as it is. But it is also an extraordinary opportunity, a chance to consciously take part in something far greater than ourselves, to contribute, even modestly, to the birth of a wiser, fairer, and more sustainable world. Perhaps you are wondering where to begin, how to take part in this great process of transformation. The answer is both simple and challenging. Start where you are, with your own life, your own community, your own unique gifts and abilities. Begin by questioning the assumptions you have internalized about what constitutes a well-lived life. about what truly brings lasting fulfillment, about how you define success, purpose, meaning. Begin experimenting with ways of living that depend less on material consumption and more on meaningful connections, that prioritize being over having, that create space for contemplation and presence in a world dominated by distraction and haste. Begin building or joining communities of shared practice and purpose, people with whom you can explore new paths, support one another, create together. Remember that cultural transformation is a deeply social process, not something we can accomplish alone. Begin using your specific talents and skills to contribute in your own unique way to the emergence of a better world. Whether you are an artist or an engineer, a teacher or an entrepreneur, a parent or a community activist, there are infinite ways to take part in this great transition. And perhaps most importantly, begin practicing patience and perseverance. This transformation will not happen overnight. There will be obstacles, setbacks, moments of despair. What matters is to keep going, one day at a time, one step at a time, trusting the process even when results are not immediately visible. If these reflections have touched something you have been feeling but perhaps could not put into words, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you will connect with a growing community of people who share your questions and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways of living amid the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us in this ongoing journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. In the end, the truth the world may not yet be ready to hear, but that conscious people are increasingly recognizing, is this: we are at a turning point in human history. The old systems, structures, and narratives are wearing out while new ones are being born. The future is not predetermined, but will be shaped by the choices we make now, individually and collectively. We can continue down the current path of meaningless consumption and unsustainable growth, even as it leaves us existentially empty and destroys the life support systems of our planet. Or we can choose a different path, one of greater awareness, wisdom, and connection. A path that honors our deepest human needs and the ecological limits of our planetary home. This choice stands before us now, not as a single grand decision, but as thousands of small choices we make every day in how we live, work, consume, and relate, in how we devote our time, attention, and energy, in the stories we tell ourselves and each other about who we are and what matters. There are no guarantees that we will choose wisely, of course. The challenges are immense. The forces maintaining the status quo are powerful, and time may be running out to avoid the catastrophic consequences of our collective past actions. But the very awareness of this choice, the recognition that we are at a turning point, is already a significant step. It is an awakening from the collective hypnosis that kept us blindly following a path we know, in our clearest moments, cannot continue. And perhaps, after all, this is the deeper purpose of the existential emptiness so many of us experience. It is not merely a symptom of something wrong, but a calling toward something truer. Not merely a sign of crisis, but a doorway to transformation, the emptiness we feel when distractions fall away, when the noise stops, when we come face to face with the great unanswered existential questions, is also a space of possibility, a fertile ground where new forms of meaning, purpose, and connection can begin to take root. Perhaps this is the ultimate invitation, not to flee from that emptiness, but to inhabit it consciously, not to rush to fill it with more noise, more activity, more consumption, but to allow it to teach us, transform us, open us to possibilities we could never imagine while we were too busy running on the treadmill of conventional success and perpetual distraction. This is the truth that conscious people are beginning to see, that the collapse of old narratives, though frightening and disorienting, is also an unprecedented opportunity, a chance to consciously take part in the birth of a new era in human history. An era not of endless material growth, but of spiritual and ecological maturity. An era not of conquest and domination, but of partnership and regeneration. An era not of distraction and escapism, but of presence and authentic connection. This vision may seem utopian, and in a sense it is not, in the sense of being impossible, but in the sense that it does not yet fully exist. It is emerging, being born through the actions and choices of countless people who, like you, are awakening to a deeper understanding of our situation and our possibilities. The invitation is for you to join this great creative process, not as a follower of some prepackaged plan or ideology, but as a co-creator, bringing your own unique gifts, insights, and visions. Because in the end, the answer to the crisis of meaning we face will not come from outside. It will not be found in some sacred book, philosophical system, or political program. It will emerge from the collective intelligence of a humanity awakening to its real situation and authentic possibilities. And perhaps one day we will look back at this moment of apparent collapse and confusion and recognize it for what it truly is, not an ending, but a new beginning, not a fall, but a metamorphosis, the moment when we as a species began to become truly conscious of ourselves and of our place on this living planet that is our only home. This is the truth that conscious people are beginning to see. And though the world may not yet be ready to fully hear it, every person who awakens to it, who begins to live in alignment with it, who shares it with others in authentic and compassionate ways, contributes to its eventual manifestation. Are you ready to take part in this great adventure? To be not just a witness, but an active participant in this extraordinary transformation? The choice, as always, is yours, and whatever that choice may be, it matters more than you can imagine.
My name's Robin Ince. I do a show on the radio called The Infinite Monkey Cage, and I love talking about scientific ideas, stories, and technology, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. And it's a beautiful thing to be in a place which is officially, you know, for light entertainment and song and dance, and actually be doing a night of scientific discovery. It's something that at the Albert Hall, I once just did a night with a bunch of physicists, and I'll tell you what, particle physics, it really does work in a dome like that. And so you all know who you've come to see, someone who, as a writer of scientific stories and scientific history, has done incredible work over the last 10 years. So please welcome to the stage Yuval Noah Harari. Are you okay with that, Chair? Yeah. Yeah. Some people are sometimes deaf in the one ear, aren't they? That's the... We've got an enormous amount to talk about, including why there's a pigeon on the cover, but I'm not going to reveal that yet. The first thing I want to say, as a storyteller, because I think that's what you really managed to bring so much life to sometimes ideas which might only appear to be an equation in people's minds. What were the first stories when you were growing up that really stuck with you, the stories that excited you?
I think I really started with mythology. I had these books about the Greek mythology and biblical mythology for young kids, and I would read them over and over again. And from there, I actually went to history. So I kind of skipped the fairy tales and the fictions and went straight to history.
And were you, because I was saying earlier, my son's doing History A-level, and I really think what did it for him was, first of all, finding out about which kings of England were so fat they exploded when they died. And you know, those kind of, it seems with history, we have sometimes gory and strange, and Vlad the Impaler and Countess Bathory and things like that. You know, did that help lure you in as a child?
I guess to some extent, but I was really interested in kind of the big questions. Also, even before with mythology, of where did everything come from? I mean, why is there something and not just nothing?
And then what were the stories that, because now, I say sapiens, do you say sapiens?
We can say both.
Yeah, we can. We can turn it into a musical number. The Hello Dolly's only just closed here. But I just wanted, that point where you thought, I really want to start dealing with these scientific ideas, and how much that felt like a change, and how much that felt like this was just another way of dealing with stories in the same way that you would deal with stories as a historian.
I mean, I think that humans are essentially storytelling animals. I mean, we think in stories. And part of the problem of science is that science often doesn't know what to do with stories and doesn't convey its messages in stories. So it is almost always at this disadvantage. And when you look at the world, so you see that in almost all cases, the people who only understand facts take orders from the people who understand stories. If you think about, I don't know, the nuclear programs of various countries today and in the past. So people who merely understand things like nuclear physics and quantum mechanics, they take their orders from people who understand things like Jewish mythology and Shiite theology and communist ideology. And this is almost always the case. And it creates a lot of problems. Again, you talk with the people who are leading, and we'll get to AI later, but you talk with the people who are leading many of the scientific and technological revolutions of this day, and just now we heard that the Nobel Prize in both physics and chemistry was given to research in AI. And they have this notion that because we develop the technology and because we understand the science, and maybe because they think they are smarter than everybody else, they will decide what to do with what they discover and what they develop, and this is almost never the case. Then comes along somebody who doesn't understand, again, anything about nuclear physics or anything about AI. They understand some mythology, and they give the orders.
Well, that seems, I mean, that disparity, I'm thinking now, tonight there may well be, well, there will be, possibly terrible destruction in Florida. And some of the people who are both using that as a political point are the same people who are also denying the science that comes with our understanding of climate change. And that seems to be one of the problems that we have, which is where people have so much information available to them, they can keep going, well, I'm going to take that bit to justify this story, and I'm going to take that bit, rather than go, I now want to read all these stories. They just go, which one is most useful to me now?
Yeah, I mean, there is a big misunderstanding about information in general and what people do with it. Too many people tend to think that information somehow means truth and knowledge and wisdom, or that information is the raw material from which you construct truth and knowledge. And it's not the case. The truth is a very small subset of all the information in the world. The truth is a very small subset because it's very costly. It takes a lot of time and effort and money to do research and fact check and analyze information in order to get at the truth. Whereas fiction and fantasy and lies, they are very, very cheap. You don't need to research anything, you just write whatever you want. And, the truth is often complicated, and it is sometimes painful, whereas fiction and fantasy can be as simple and as attractive and flattering as you would like them to be. So what we see again and again in history is that as the amount of information in the world grows because of different discoveries and inventions of humanity, it doesn't mean that the amount of truth and knowledge and wisdom in the world grows. And you see that modern societies are as susceptible as Stone Age tribes to fall victim to these cases of mass delusion, like 20th century fascism or 20th century communism. They are as susceptible to that as the Stone Age tribes. So all the discoveries and all the scientific knowledge and all the technology doesn't really protect us from these dangers.
And do you feel that it seems to me that there's certainly quite a few moments in the book where one of the biggest problems is who controls the dissemination of information? So, yeah. I mean, in the last, certainly since Reagan in America and also Thatcher here, where suddenly there was an ability for people to very close, almost have a monopoly on controlling the stories that are going out. Yes, we can all get our stories out on, some form of social media, but we don't have the huge power behind us of the news media.
The key question in information is not necessarily who produces it, but who disseminates it. Especially when it is very cheap to produce information, the bottleneck is human attention. And there you find not the authors, there you find the editors and the curators. They are they sit at the junctions of the information network. And maybe I'll give two examples from history. So one of the most important editorial processes in the history of humankind was editing the Bible. The Bible did not come down from the sky in its finished form. If you look, for instance, at the early history of Christianity, and when do we have the New Testament? So Jesus didn't write the New Testament, and St. Paul didn't write the New Testament, and they didn't read them, of course, because it didn't exist at the time. In the first centuries of Christianity, different Christian authors and different Christian sects and ways of thinking, they produced all kinds of texts. They wrote Gospels, not just the 4 that became canonical, many Gospels. And they wrote all kinds of prophecies and letters and fables and chronicles and so many different texts. And then there became a problem of what to read. The same way that people today, you open Netflix, so which series to watch, there are so many. You need a recommendation list. So also the early Christians, at a certain point, they needed a recommendation list. And this happened almost 4 centuries after the crucifixion. At the end of the 4th century, there is a committee of bishops and theologians that gathers in 2 cities, in Hippo and then in Carthage, today Tunisia in North Africa, which is a very important Christian center at the time. And this is the committee that comes up with the recommendation list that we know as the New Testament. They created these top 27 texts that every Christian should read. And they made a decision. They didn't write the texts. They were the curators and editors. And they made momentous decisions that shaped the world for the next more than 1,500 years. For example, there was one text which was very popular at the time called the Acts of Paul and Thecla, which told the story of St. Paul and his female disciple Thecla, who was a Christian leader, and she gave sermons and performed miracles and baptized and so forth. And this was a very popular text, and it was used as proof that women can be leaders in the church. And then there were other texts. For instance, a letter that was supposedly a letter from St. Paul to Timothy, one of his disciples, but most scholars today believe it was a 2nd century forgery in the name of St. Paul, which basically said that women should not be leaders, they should remain silent, their job is to bear children and raise children and do whatever the men tell them to do. And in the Council of Carthage, which is I think 397 or 396 CE, the committee decides that the Acts of Paul and Thecla will stay out of the top 27 recommendation list, but the letter to Timothy will be in, and this is 1 Timothy, which is still in millions and millions of Bibles all over the world. And this shaped how people think, even to this day. And, if you fast forward to the modern age, so again, the curators and editors of news, of information, they are some of the most powerful people in society. They decide what the questions of the day are, what people will be talking about, what people will be thinking about. And, in the French Revolution, one of the people who shapes the course of the French Revolution more than anybody else, until he's murdered, is Jean-Paul Marat, who is the editor of one of the most popular newspapers of the time, L'Ami du Peuple, the friend of the people. And then you have, for instance, Lenin, that before he was Soviet dictator, his most important job was editor of the newspaper Iskra. And Mussolini began as a journalist, then he became editor of the Avanti, the fascist newspaper, and then dictator of Italy. So this was a kind of ladder of promotion: journalist, editor, dictator. And if you think, who are the most important editors in the world today? They are not human beings. They are algorithms. With all the talk about the AI is coming to take our jobs, one of the first jobs that was automated was not taxi drivers or coal miners or textile workers, it was editors. The editors of Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and YouTube, they are not human beings. Lenin's old job is now in the hand of algorithms. They decide what will be the top of the newsfeed, what people will be talking about, what people will be thinking about.
See, that's very, because immediately it obviously made me think, Boris Johnson, journalist, Michael Gove, journalist, David Cameron was PR for Carlton Television. And it seems to, what those jobs and what you were saying about is they're jobs in which you are not looking for truth, they're jobs in which you're looking for sales of your story. So that's the...
That depends on how you do your job. I mean, that's the biggest question when we talk about algorithms or when we talk about humans, is what is the goal? If you aim for sales and user engagement, that often leads in very dangerous directions. The algorithms, what they discovered over the last 15 years or so, is that if you want to increase user engagement, and engagement, it sounds a good thing, like who doesn't want to be engaged? But the algorithms discovered that the easiest way to increase user engagement, which means to make people spend more time on the platform, is to press the anger button, or the fear button, or the greed button in the brain. This is how you glue people to the screens. And this resulted in this epidemic of toxic information, which is drowning democracies all over the world. Democracy in essence is a conversation.
Dictatorship is dictate. One person dictates everything. Democracy is a conversation. And what we are seeing right now all over the world is that we have the most sophisticated information technology in history, and humans are no longer able to converse. Humans are no longer able to hold a rational conversation, not just to talk is easy, to listen to the other side. And in every country, they have these special explanations of why is it happening in the US. But then you go to Canada, you go to Brazil, you go to the Philippines, it's everywhere the same. And it is because the algorithms are managing at present the conversation, and their motivation is not to have a rational and meaningful conversation, but to increase user engagement. And people are very engaged. What we desperately need is more boring politics, but it's just becoming more and more exciting and engaging every day. And the tragedy of it is that this was known for centuries. This is not the first time this happens in history. If you look, for instance, at the print revolution in early modern Europe, and if you go today to Silicon Valley and you talk to the people who are leading the present revolution, they would often tell you the story of the print revolution as a kind of model. That look, when print was invented or brought to Europe, it broke the chokehold of the Catholic Church over the European information system, and this led to the scientific revolution. And this is what we are doing right now. And the tragedy is that they just don't know the history. The print revolution did not lead to the scientific revolution. There are 200 years between when Gutenberg brings print to Europe in the middle of the 15th century until you see the real flowering of the scientific revolution in the 17th century with people like Newton. In between, you have the worst wave of wars of religion in European history and the worst wave of witch hunting in European history. And the big bestsellers of a late 15th and 16th century Europe were not scientific texts like that of Copernicus. Very few people read Copernicus. It was witch hunting manuals and extremist religious tracts, because user engagement, it's very engaging. Like one of the really first big bestsellers was a book with immense influence until this very day called The Hammer of the Witches, Malleus Maleficarum, which was the kind of do-it-yourself manual to identifying and killing witches, something everybody needs at home. And it was a huge bestseller. And to understand why, so just to get a sense, a feel of what kind of book it was, so there is an entire section in the book about discussing the ability of witches to steal penises from men. And you have all these evidence that the author, Heinrich Kramer, brings. Like, for instance, he has a story about a man who wakes up one morning to discover that his penis is gone. And he suspects immediately the local witch. So he goes to the local witch in his village and kind of convinces her, forces her, bring me my penis back. And the witch says, okay. And she tells him, climb this tree, you'll find a bird's nest at the top of the tree. So the man climbs the tree and finds a bird's nest. And in the nest, he finds all the penises that the witch stole from different men in the nearby villages. And she tells him, okay, you can take your own. And the man, of course, chooses the biggest one. And then the witch tells him, no, you can't take this one. I know, this one belongs to the parish priest, not to you. Now, you understand why this book was a bestseller, who sold a few more copies than Copernicus's On the Revolutions of the Heaven, with all these mathematical equations about the movements of the planets. Now, this all sounds very funny until you look at the consequences. Because it was this book and other books like it that fueled the great European witch hunt, which was a modern phenomenon, not a medieval phenomenon, in which tens of thousands of people were tortured and killed in the most horrendous ways. Again, to give just one example, in Munich, a family, the Pappenheimer family, was arrested by the authorities because they were accused of being witches. And according to the methods recommended by the Hammer of the Witches of how to interrogate witches, you do it by torturing them until they confess. And the family's mother, father, and 3 kids, and the inquisitors start by torturing the youngest child, a 10-year-old child, Hans, and they torture him in really unspeakable ways until he breaks and confesses that his mother and the other family members are all witches, that they went to meet Satan, that they molest and eat children, that they get involved in these orgies, and that they murder people and summon hailstorms. And with this confession, they then break, and again, they torture and break the other family members, and they are all executed, including the 10-year-old boy. And this was the result of this wave of toxic information about witches and Satan and witch hunts, which did not have a single grain of truth in it. And when you look at Europe in the 16th century, you see it kind of washed by this flood of toxic information. And the key thing is that the printing press, it just prints. It doesn't judges what is true and what is false, what is reliable and what is unreliable. You cannot expect technology by itself to make progress there. If you just flood the world with more information, you don't get necessarily the truth and you don't get more knowledge.
I think that the Malleus Maleficarum is because I have actually read it. The Folio Society bring it out about once every 10 years. And it's one of those interesting things which I often say to science authors, don't write a science book that's right, because it means that after 5 years it won't be printed anymore because you'll be wrong. You need to write absolute nonsense if you want to keep, so Eric von Daniken wrote about all of these, this is actually a runway for aliens, and these pyramids, they were built by some aliens as well. And his books are still published, and he's one of the most successful authors because he wrote something that was entirely wrong. Whereas those who are writing things that are accurate have to keep rewriting the book.
Yeah, basically in science, you only publish corrections. That's it. If you think, what do scientific journals actually publish? They only publish corrections to previous knowledge. If somebody comes and says, okay, Einstein was right, and Darwin was right, and all these people were right, so what? So this is not a reason to publish what we already know that. If you want to get published and if you want to get ahead, you need to find something that Einstein was wrong about or that Einstein didn't know, some lacuna in the theory. And this is really the foundation of science and of all trustworthy institutions. Now, we live in an era when people are losing trust in institutions, which is extremely dangerous because the only way for society to function without trustworthy institutions is with a dictatorship. Democracy is built on trust, dictatorships are built on terror. For democracy to function, there need to be some institutions that people trust. If they lose trust in all the institutions, the only choice left is between anarchy, societal collapse, or a dictatorship which doesn't need trust because its fuel, it functions on terror. And then people ask, so okay, how do I know which institution to trust? And the best yardstick I know about is institutions that have strong self-correcting mechanisms, institutions that are not only willing, but are actively seeking their own mistakes and errors and are willing to identify them and to correct them. So if you compare, for instance, religious institutions with scientific institutions, this is the key difference. That in a religious institution, the claim usually would be that we possess the absolute truth. There can be no error in what we say. So there is no room for self-correction. If you think about the Bible, for instance, they keep printing the same text again and again and again for centuries. There is no mechanism in Judaism and in Christianity to correct errors in the Bible, whether factual errors or ethical errors. You know, you think about something like the Ten Commandments. So the 10th commandment actually endorses slavery, because the 10th commandment says that you should not covet your neighbor's field or house or slaves, which implies that God is perfectly okay with people owning slaves. He's just very angry if you coveted the slaves of somebody else. No. You shouldn't do that. And there is no mechanism to amend it. You know, if you compare it, say, to the US Constitution, which people often say the US Constitution endorsed slavery, and that's true, but the US Constitution also included a self-correcting mechanism. There was a clause in the Constitution that we know we are not perfect. You know, the Ten Commandments start with, I am your Lord God. I wrote this, so you can't correct this. The US Constitution starts with, we the people. We wrote this, we are just people, we are just humans, maybe we made mistakes. So here is a mechanism that if future generations find a mistake in something we wrote, this is how you change it. It's not easy, but it can be done. And the US Constitution was eventually amended to outlaw slavery, to ban slavery. Now in the 10 Commandments, there is no 11th commandment which says, well, if you want to change one of the previous commandments, you can do it by a 2/3 majority vote. So we still have the same text as it was written in the Middle East during the Iron Age with its endorsement of slavery. Now, science, it's built, I mean, the very central pillar of science is the self-correcting mechanism. You want to understand an institution, try to understand the incentive of the people in the institution. How do they get a promotion? So in a church or in the Jewish rabbinate, how do you get a promotion? If you say that whatever the elders said before you is correct, you have a good chance of getting a promotion after promotion until you become chief rabbi or pope. But in science, it doesn't work. If you just go and say Einstein was right, so what? You will not get a position in university. You will certainly not get Nobel Prize for that. I mean, the whole incentive structure is publish or perish. And in order to publish, the only thing that scientific journals publish is corrections and amendments, in the sense, I discovered something that Einstein didn't know, they meant, okay, we'll publish it. And if you want to go all the way to win Nobel Prize, you need to discover either a very big mistake in the previous theories or a very big lacuna, something some people didn't know. So this is an incentive structure that inspires trust. If you ask an institution, tell me about your biggest mistakes, and it tells you, we never make mistakes, don't trust it. If you ask an institution, tell me about your biggest mistakes, and it tells you, do you have a year or two, we can tell you a lot about not just factual mistakes, also about, again, moral mistakes, ethical mistakes. Like you go today to university, you will study in many seminars about how scientific disciplines were implicated, were responsible to some extent to horrible historical crimes. Slavery, imperialism, persecution of minorities, of women. Yes, anthropologists and historians and archaeologists and biologists, but they were part of it. They were partly to blame. And at least for me, this inspires trust.
So, I mean, that thing when you're looking at information that we need, because I was thinking when you mentioned the Bible, Francesca Stavrokopoulou, wonderful Bible scholar, she said the trouble with the Bible is it's a book written by men with daddy issues, which I thought was kind of a, yeah, and perhaps one should say it was a book edited by men with daddy issues, because, you know, for instance, you were talking about childhood interest in myths, and as we've seen in the last 20 years, you know, a lot of writers, people like Natalie Haynes, have returned to these myths and found out that they were entirely rewritten, and that the message, again, is very often a message of subjugation and of misogyny. But then it just seems to set with the power structure of, so anything that fits the power structure at the time is therefore we're going to keep that story and we're going to change that story. And then it seems to me quite surprising how long those stories remain intact. What do we need now? Because we love always to think, don't we, that, oh no, but now we've moved on, now we're better at this. And yet every time we look back century by century, we see the same mistakes being made in terms of those who are oppressed and those who are marginalized.
And first of all, luckily, it's not the same mistakes. Humanity sometimes does learn some lessons. Otherwise, it would be hopeless. If you cannot point to any progress that was done in history by now, we might just as well give it up. If all the generations before us could not get anything right, could not improve anything, what are the chances that we can do it? So I think it's also important for historians, for others, to acknowledge improvements when they do occur, and they occur sometimes. But with regard to the survival and the power of myth, and especially of very ancient mythologies, the two things to realize, first of all, the only thing that can replace one story is another story. You can never replace a story just with a list of facts and statistics and so forth, because this is not the way that people think. You can use facts and statistics to puncture lots of holes in the existing mythology. It will still hold. What you need to do is just tell a different story, a better story, and then you don't need to puncture any holes in the old story. So that's the first principle. The second is that the longer the story survives, the stronger it becomes. And then it becomes more difficult to replace it. I mean, you look at the world's mythologies. So thousands of years ago, there were so many mythologies. Like every little tribe and every people and country had very different mythologies, and very few of them survived. And today, almost all the world knows just, 3, 4, 5 mythologies top. And they are extremely powerful. And every time we try to tell a new story, the old mythologies sneak back. Because they are now so powerful after being there for thousands of years. And again, this is something that science struggles with. And I think part of what I try to do and other people try to do is try to tell better scientific stories, but they still need to be stories if they are to appeal to human beings, because we think in stories.
See, I find the mythologies, you might have been there in Singapore, there's this wonderful Museum of Asian Cultures. And on the first floor, each room has a different religion. And you see these wonderful mythologies with playful, impish, sexual, rude, angry, strange, all manner of demons and imps. And then you get to the Abrahamic one, which kind of becomes a dictatorship in which someone created us and is now just very disappointed, and we've been born with original sin. And it kind of feels like those mythologies have so much play and so much representation of who we are as well, all these different things going on in our minds. And then what we get with the Abrahamic faith is closer to me, in a lot of the ways it's interpreted, as a dictatorship.
Because they were created in an age of monarchies and empires. And, God is often depicted as a king. And a lot of the political realities of the Middle East in the Iron Age, they were incorporated into the mythology. So God is often made in the image of the kings, of the emperors of the day. And this is still with us. So we need to take these stories extremely seriously, because they still shape our culture, they still shape our psychology, they still shape our politics.
In terms of in the book, you look a lot at the problems of the algorithm, and especially when the algorithm becomes something without any human, once it just becomes a circle of computers. So looking at politics now, for instance, looking at the American election, do you imagine that someone like Trump could have been a president or indeed presidential candidate 30 years ago? Did it require the technology and the social media and this way of being bombarded with so many possible truths for us to return to this kind of politician?
It seems so, definitely. And again, what is really necessary to understand is the power of information technology and of social media in relation to democracy. Because democracy, as we said earlier, in essence, it's a conversation. It's a group of people coming together, talking to each other, listening to each other, in an attempt to reach some common decision about the important issues of the day. Now, for most of history, this type of system could only work on small scales. The only examples we know of ancient democracies are city-states like Athens or Republican Rome, or even smaller towns and tribes. We have no example before the modern age of a large-scale democracy, of an entire country with millions of people spread over thousands of kilometers that is managed democratically. And the reason was not that people didn't know about democracy. I mean, originally most human societies, certainly in the Stone Age, most hunter-gatherer bands and tribes were democratic. And also many of the first towns and city-states were democratic. The ideas were known. And if you look, for instance, at the Roman Empire, the Romans know everything about democracy. And even the emperors, they know that the Romans love the democratic ideal, so they never claim to be autocrats. They keep up the facade of democracy, like in Putin's Russia, or like in Maduro's Venezuela. In the Roman Empire, you still have every year elections for consuls and praetors. There is the Senate, there is the popular assemblies. They keep the facade, but it's not a democracy. It's not a republic. It's an autocracy. So what happens as the size of the polity becomes bigger? The conversation collapses. I mean, you can have most citizens or a significant part of the citizenry of a city gathering together in the main square to discuss the major issues of the day. But you cannot do it with millions of people spread over the whole of Italy or the whole of the Mediterranean. So as the size of the polity becomes bigger, democracy inevitably collapsed. And you know, if it was something about the Caesar family that destroyed the Roman Republic, we should have seen at least large-scale democracies elsewhere, in India, in Central America, in China, nowhere. Because the information technology of the day did not allow millions of people to have a conversation like that. The large-scale democracy becomes possible for the first time in history in the late modern age, due to the invention of several critical information technologies. First, it is the newspaper. Then it's the telegraph and the radio and television and all that. Only then we begin to see large-scale democracies. So large-scale democracies, they are built on top of information technology. Information technology is not a side dish. We have democracy, oh, and you have information technology. No, it's the basis. And over the last 20 years, there has been a major revolution in information technology. So inevitably, there is an earthquake in the building built on top of it, democracy. And you see it all over the world, and it only makes sense. You now have billions of people spending hours every day on these platforms. This becomes the main way for people to form organizations, to recruit people, to motivate people for political action. So it has immense impact. Now, it's not necessarily a negative impact. History is never deterministic, and technology is not deterministic. The question is what we do with it. Unfortunately, what we did with it, with social media and with algorithms over the last 10, 15 years was the wrong thing. And we now have an even bigger wave coming of AI, which is going to change the world in so many dramatic ways. We are still in control, maybe for the next few years, but we have to make some really wise decisions in the next, say, 5 to 10 years before we lose control. Because what's different about AI compared to every previous technology in history is that this time we can really lose control to the technology. All the tales we had throughout history about losing control of technology, it was really just metaphors. You can't really have a printing press in charge of society. You can't really have a radio set or an atom bomb in charge of society because they can't make any decisions. AI is the first technology in history that can make decisions by itself, can invent new ideas by itself, can learn and change by itself, which means it's the first technology which is an agent and not a tool. A printing press is a tool. It's in my hands. I decide it will print the Bible, it will print Copernicus, I decide. AI, no. The AI can decide by itself which story to create and which story to promote. It can really take over. And you know, there is a huge confusion around AI because now it's kind of the hottest thing, certainly in the market. If you want to make people buy something or invest their money in a company, you attach the label, oh, it's an AI. So everything now becomes AI, and it becomes difficult to know, so what really is AI? Not every machine is an AI. If you think, for instance, about machines we have for a long time, like coffee machine, most coffee machines are not AIs. If you approach your coffee machine and you press a button and the machine does exactly what it was pre-programmed to do, like you press this button, it produces an espresso cup, this is not an AI. This is just an automatic machine.
But if it says, I thought you'd prefer soup, then we realize something's changing here.
Exactly. If it tells you, before you press any button, it tells you, I've been watching you, I've been learning you, and I've been watching millions of other people, and based on everything I know about you, I predict you would like coffee, so I made it for you. Or I think, based on everything I know about you, that actually it's better for you now to eat soup than to drink coffee, then it's an AI. When it starts learning and changing, and because of this ability to learn and change, then by definition, we cannot predict how it will develop, and it could escape our control, and in the worst case scenarios, enslave or annihilate us. There are, of course, much better scenarios. It can be really the best technology we ever invented. It can provide us with the best healthcare in history, with the best education in history, but it all depends on the decisions we are going to make in the next few years.
I'm definitely going to invent a machine that at some point, every now and again, the coffee machine just goes, you've had enough. And that will just be enough for people to believe it may well have become sentient. But that's an interesting thing to me, which is, you know, as you mentioned in the book, you know, one of the most common images of AI going rogue is in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where we have Hal, and Hal actually has become conscious. But I get the feeling reading the book that really the AI may well, you know, if it does in any way destroy us or start to, you know, destabilize civilization, it won't even be conscious. It will still be, it won't have made a decision to destroy us. It will be something which has just run wild enough. Does that sound fair? Because I feel that AI and consciousness is still, you know, possibly a long, you know, it's the point that if AI beats us at chess, it starts to gloat. And then we realize, oh, it's beginning to get conscious now. It's kind of, but it feels to me that long before that, we may well have allowed AI to run wild.
We just don't know. I mean, the issue of consciousness is extremely complicated because we don't understand consciousness in humans. We don't understand consciousness in other animals. Again, there is a huge confusion about the very meaning of the term. People confuse it with intelligence. So maybe just to clarify, intelligence is the ability to pursue goals and to solve problems on the way to attaining your goal. Your goal could be to win a chess. Your goal could be to drive a car to a particular point. Your goal could be to identify a disease. This is intelligence, and this is what we see now with the development of AI. It's the development of intelligence. Consciousness is something else. Consciousness is the ability to feel things like pain and pleasure and love and hate. Now, we tend to confuse intelligence and consciousness because in humans and also in other mammals, they go together. We solve problems, we set ourselves targets, goals, and we solve problems on the way there based on our feelings. It's our feelings that define the goals for us. we'll rely on our feelings to solve problems. So it's very hard for us to even differentiate the two. As far as we know, AI and computers in general until today, they don't have consciousness at all. They have intelligence. In many fields, in some fields, they are already more intelligent than us, but they don't rely on feelings to solve problems, to win a chess, for instance. But as AI becomes more and more sophisticated, it becomes harder to know for sure. How can we be sure that the AI is not conscious? We can't, with other people and with other animals also, we have no test for consciousness. It's really just a social convention. This is something that goes back thousands of years. Philosophers in ancient India and China and Greece, they already knew that there is no objective test for consciousness. So it's just social convention. We accept that other people are conscious. When it comes to animals, you can see it most clearly. When there is emotional attachment, we usually also grant consciousness to animals, like to pets, to dogs and cats and so forth. But we tend not to do it to animals we eat, because we don't have the same kind of emotional attachment. Now, what happens once you have emotional attachments and relationships with AIs? There will be, I think, a big pressure to start recognizing them as conscious entities, even if they are not, and really, we can't tell. And there are a lot of commercial interests, commercial reasons to produce AIs that mimic consciousness, that mimic feelings. It could be for good purposes, you know, whether it's in healthcare or education, an AI that can show us empathy, and we feel that it's empathic, would be much more successful in giving us care or in educating us. There could also be dangerous reasons to do it, to manipulate people. We talked earlier about all these algorithms manipulating social media, and they really manipulated attention. The big battle in the 2010s and early 2020s was for control of human attention. But if you want to persuade people to buy something, to vote for a politician, to adopt a certain view, the ultimate weapon is not attention, it's intimacy. An intimate relationship can convince you far more effectively to change your mind about something than just grabbing your attention. You know, throughout history, emperors and dictators and governments, they developed tools to control human attention, to mass produce attention. Like you live in Nazi Germany, and everybody, if Hitler gives a speech on the radio, everybody must open the radio and listen to the speech. They control mass attention. But this is not intimacy. The radio has no intimate relationship with you. Now, for the first time in history, we are about to have the technology to mass produce intimacy. Millions, even billions of AIs that could fake intimacy, and in many ways can even be better at it than human beings. I mean, one of the things that humans are very frustrated with in their relationships in life is that other people often fail to understand how we feel or ignore how we feel. And we tend to go through life kind of yearning that somebody would understand us. Like we want our parents to understand us, our friends, our spouses, our teachers, our bosses, and very often they don't. And the reason they don't is because they are too preoccupied with their own feelings. Like your husband comes back from work, grumpy because of something that happened at work, and doesn't pay attention to how you feel. And this is frustrating. This will never happen with AI. It will never be grumpy from work. It is a machine that can focus its entire attention, 100% of its attention, only on you, only on deciphering how you feel. Again, based on, like it could follow you for years and know everything that you forgot about yourself, it still remembers. We learn to understand every tiny muscle movement in your facial expression. What are the emotional implications of this frown, or of this smile. It could be far better than humans at deciphering our emotions and therefore at creating this intimacy. And then the big question is there really a consciousness behind it, or is it all fake? And this is going to be one of the big questions, I think, of the 21st century, socially, also politically and legally. Do we recognize AIs as persons? And you could have, wars or huge disagreements between countries when some countries recognize AIs as persons with rights and other countries don't. And the current debates and conflicts about human rights will be as nothing compared to such a world. There are countries, like the US is the lead example, where the path to recognizing AIs as persons is already wide open. I'm not sure how the situation is in the UK, but according to US law, corporations are persons. Now, until today, this was just legal fiction, that US law recognizes Google and General Electric and Nike and whatever as legal persons with rights. For instance, freedom of speech. This was Supreme Court decision from, I think, 2010 in Citizens United, all about whether corporations can donate money in lobbying to politicians. And the argument was they are legal persons, they have freedom of speech, donating money to politicians is freedom of speech. So, and the Supreme Court accepted it. So until today, this was just a metaphor, because all the decisions of Google or General Electric or any other company was made by human beings. The company could not actually make a decision. You needed a company executive, accountant, lawyer to make a decision. But AI can make decisions by itself. Now, what happens if you now incorporate an AI? You do this magic ceremony in a lawyer's office, and this is now a corporation. And according to US law, this is now a person. And this person can make decisions by itself. It can open a bank account, for instance. It can go online and hire its services in, writing texts to people, earn money, and then invest its money in the stock exchange. And because if it's a really good AI, it will know how to invest money better than most humans. So at least theoretically, it could become the richest person in the US. So think about it. The richest person in the US is not a human being, and it has freedom of speech, which, for instance, says it can donate billions of dollars to politicians to lobby for more rights to AIs. And again, this is the technological path is still bumpy, but the legal path is wide open.
See, that's probably a good story, that one, because once you start scaring the billionaires, then they start to go off. What do you mean I'm not going to be the richest person? My love robot is, and then everything kind of changes there. We're going to have to take an interval. There's going to be a QR code. I've still not asked you about the pigeon. We'll begin that.
The pigeon,
there's
right.
so much. No, we're not going to have to do that in the second half. There's going to be a QR. Oh, there it is. And if you click on that, and then any questions that you would like to ask Yuval, I will read out, and we'll deal with your questions and the pigeon in the second half. Thank you very much, everyone, so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the second half. We have to start with the pigeon. So, so tell us the story of why it was decided in the end, this huge book about so many different and complex ideas should be represented in the bookshop by a pigeon.
Well, there are several levels to it. I mean, on the simplest level, there are some stories in the book about carrier pigeons as an information system, and especially about one pigeon, which 100 years ago was the most famous bird in the world, which was credited with saving an entire American battalion during the First World War. So this is kind of the first level. Then the second level is that we wanted something organic. On, you know, all these AIs and computers, and we wanted something organic on the cover, because the world is now in this tug of war between the organic and the inorganic. Humans, like pigeons, we are organic beings. And part of that is that we live by organic cycles, like day and night, summer and winter, times of activity and times of rest, of sleep. And computers and algorithms and AIs, they are not organic. They are far more different from us than pigeons are. They are always on. They never need to rest. And part of what is happening in the world is that as the AIs become more and more important as decision makers, as they take over more and more systems, the big question is, will they force us to try and function by a kind of inorganic timescale which will kill us? Because if you keep an organic entity on all the time, it eventually just collapses and dies. Or we can make the AIs slow down and adapt to organic time. So, and you know, I'll just give maybe one example if you think about the financial system. So traditionally, finance was a system created by human beings. Even bankers and investors are human beings. And they need time to sleep. They want to spend time with their family. They want to go on vacation. They want to go on holiday. So if you think about the most important financial market in the world, Wall Street, it's open only 9:30 in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Mondays to Fridays, that's it. And it's also closed on Christmas and Martin Luther King Day and so forth. This is how a human organic system functions. Now, as AIs take over the financial system, there is increasing pressure on bankers and investors and so forth to be on all the time. If you go on vacation, if you sleep, you are left behind. And the same thing is happening to journalists, the same thing is happening to politicians, and this is really terrible. So the pigeon also kind of talks to this tension between the organic and the inorganic. And the third level, it goes back to mythology and to a linguistic misunderstanding. In Hebrew, the word for dove is also pigeon. In the ancient Middle East, there are just no doves at all. There are just pigeons. This is maybe why there is no peace in the Middle East, because there are no doves. And so in the biblical story of Noah and the flood, Noah doesn't send a dove, he sends a pigeon. And I know that pigeons have this terrible reputation, like in central London, oh, they are rats with wings. But at least Noah's bird that went to see whether the flood is over was a pigeon. And we are now in this information flood, and this is the kind of my pigeon that I'm sending to see if the flood may be over.
Well, that actually does bring us... That brings us, you were mentioning there the war in the Middle East, and the first question that we received from the audience is, what is your stance on the current conflict in Palestine? Well, it's a very tough question, obviously.
But a very important question, and as the conflict becomes worse and worse, and you know, it's like, I have a doctor friend who tells me that as long as the patient is still alive, things can get worse. And it's the same in the Middle East. You think you've hit rock bottom, there is still a long way to go, and unfortunately it can be covered very, very quickly. Things can become even worse, much worse. And I would say two things. I mean, first of all, again, going back to mythology, the conflict, the tragedy of the conflict, but also the ray of hope in the conflict, is that the conflict is not about anything objective. It's not the laws of physics or the laws of biology that force the people to fight. It's mythological stories in their minds. Because there is no shortage of land between the Mediterranean and Jordan River to build houses and schools and factories and hospitals for everyone. There is no shortage of food, so that nobody should be hungry. There is no shortage of water. Yes, it's a desert mostly, but we now know how to desalinize water from the Mediterranean. There is enough water. There is no shortage of energy. So what are people fighting over? They are fighting over mythical stories in their minds. They are saying God gave this whole place to us, and we cannot compromise on God's present. If it was up to me, yes, I'll compromise, but I can't compromise on behalf of God. And again, the ray of hope there is that if just people change their minds, we don't need to kind of create more land. We don't need to create anything. We just need to change our minds. But it's very, very difficult to change people's minds. And the place that I would start, and this is the second thing that I think very important to say, that many wars, they begin in the mind with things that the mind just refuses to accept. There is like the mind says, I cannot contain this thing. There is no room in my mind to contain this thing, but it is out there in the world. So instead of changing my mind to find room for it, I will just destroy it in the world. And this is war. The attempt of many minds to destroy something that they just can't contain. And in this case, on both sides, you see that people just cannot contain, refuse to accept the very existence or the right to exist of the other side. It should be very, very simple to acknowledge that in this land, you have 7 million Palestinians who were almost all of them born there. They have nowhere else to go. They have a right to exist. They have a right to exist in security and prosperity. And in the same land, there also are 7 million Jews who are also mostly born there. They have nowhere to go, and they also have a right to exist in security and prosperity. And this is something that too many people, both back home and also around the world, just cannot contain. They don't find room in their minds for both of these things. They can only acknowledge half of reality. They see one people and say, yes, they have a right, but they can't see the other people and their right to exist. And as long as this continues, the war will continue. And again, the first step, and of course every side says, but they want to destroy us. And both sides are correct. Again, the tragedy is that it's not paranoia. Both sides are correct when they say they want to destroy us. But it's very difficult to change the minds of other people. It's a bit easier to start by changing our own mind. And the first step is simply to acknowledge the full reality that there is another people and they also have a right to exist.
Thinking of that in terms of the technology, discussing in the book, on so many situations, including this, it again becomes a binary thing. Are you with us? Are you against us? Which side are you on? As opposed to, say, being on the side of peace, on the side of... Do you see that there is a way of adapting technology so that we, again, in America, the way that we've seen the kind of the two sides, and in particular, when you see MAGA people, it's like this has become a religious belief almost. Can we start using this technology? How do we turn, how do we as an audience, how do we stop those algorithms that make everything a binary situation? How do we start trying to turn these algorithms into something which makes the sky wider rather than narrower?
I mean, so there are two questions here. I mean, what can we do, at least starting with ourselves in changing our minds, and then how do we control the technology that is messing with our minds? So again, it's always easier to blame the other side. They should change their minds. But it's always easier to start by changing our own minds, because even though it's very difficult, it's a bit easier than getting into somebody else's mind and changing it. And it starts by kind of being more charitable and generous in how we interpret the opinions of other people and what other people say. Like somebody says something, there are 1,000 different ways to interpret it. Don't choose the worst interpretation you can think of. Choose the most charitable, or maybe the most charitable, but a more charitable interpretation. So again, to take one of the main discussions today all over the world about immigration. Don't immediately assume that if somebody opposes immigration, then he is a fascist or she is a fascist, or if somebody is in favor of less strict rules on immigration, then they are traitors who want to destroy the country. Immigration really is a difficult subject. I mean, I don't think that anybody thinks that there is just an unlimited right to immigration, that any amount of people can go anywhere they want in the world. This is just not workable. So, I mean, the democratic way is to have a conversation about it. Some people want stricter rules, some people want looser rules, and we can have the conversation, and we can try different policies. This is what democracy is all about. But if we turn it into this kind of Manichaean struggle between good and evil, that are vilifying the other side, then this takes, again, something that should be up for a democratic conversation and turning it into a life and death struggle which destroys democracy. Now we have the problem that the algorithms, even if we try to make the effort to be more charitable and generous, the algorithms are constantly kind of shifting and controlling the discussion and pushing it in ways that make it more engaging and exciting, but destructive. And here we need regulations and we need institutions. So two key regulations that should be enacted and should be agreed upon is, first of all, that no counterfeit humans. That algorithms and bots cannot pretend to be human beings. They are welcome to join the conversation in some cases. Like you want to get medical advice, it's okay to get an advice from an AI, provided it identifies itself as an AI. If you have, say, let's say on Twitter, some story gains a lot of attention, and you also want to know, oh, so many people are interested in that story, I also want to know what everybody's talking about, we need to know that it's really humans interested in that story, it's not bots that are pushing it. So we should not have bots impersonating people on social media. And anybody who says, what about freedom of speech? Well, bots don't have freedom of speech. Humans have it. So that's one key regulation. The other, which we mentioned already previously, is that companies should be responsible for the actions of their algorithms. Not for the actions of the users. If a human user published some hate-filled conspiracy theory, I'm in the camp of the people who think we should be very careful before we tell Facebook or Twitter to start censoring real human users. The problem is not that this person has compiled some conspiracy theory. The problem is then that the algorithm of the company deliberately promoted this content at the expense of other content, pushed it to the top of the newsfeed, recommended it to more people, and the company should be liable for that, for what its algorithms are doing. The last thing I would say is that regulations can only go so far, because as we mentioned earlier, AIs are not tools, they are agents. They can learn and change by themselves, which is why nobody has any idea how they will be like, what they will be doing, how the world would look like in 10 years. We cannot anticipate everything and regulate in advance. So what we need is to build living institutions staffed by some of the best human talent, but also with enough money to buy the latest technological toys to understand the front line of the technological development, and is able to understand and react to things on the fly. And before we even think about regulation, regulations are like our teeth. Before you have teeth, you need eyes to see what you're biting. So we cannot have a democratic discussion about regulating AI if we don't understand what is happening. And who can we rely on to tell us what is happening? The companies that we are supposed to regulate, the 2 or 3 countries in the world that are leading the AI revolution? I mean, how are people in Nigeria or in Brazil supposed to know what is really happening at the forefront of the development of AI? So the first thing we need is an international institution with a lot of funding from government that is able to understand what is really happening and to start a human discussion about what we do about it.
The next question, nice easy one for your next one. It's very, it reminds me of Harlan Ellison's wonderfully titled short story, I Have No Mouth But I Must Scream. Will artificial intelligence replace God?
Potentially, yes. I mean, if it can replace newspaper editors, so potentially yes, because especially if you think about textual religions which are based on texts. So the word of God comes from a text. This was the kind of the big invention of religions of the book, like Judaism and Christianity and Islam, that God speaks to us through a book, through a text. And for centuries, these religions just wrote texts about texts about texts. These were the mouthpieces of God. The rabbis, the imams, the theologians, this is what they do. They read texts and write texts. And now we have something that can read text and write texts like no human being. No human rabbi is able to read all the texts ever produced by in the Jewish tradition. So everybody reads the Bible and the Mishnah and the Talmud, but you cannot read all the texts of every rabbi that lived in Yemen or Poland like 300 years ago. Now you can. There is something that can. You have this AlphaGo that beat the world champion at Go, and you have AlphaFold that knows how to fold all the proteins in the world. You can have AlphaRabbi that just read all the texts, not a single one is left out, and can find patterns in the texts that escaped all the human rabbis over centuries. And then the big question for a religion like Judaism is, what do you do with it? Do you accept its new ideas, its revolutionary interpretations? It's a big question. I don't know what the answer is.
Can you write a screenplay?
I'll say one more thing about it. Because the whole idea around religions of the book is they want to get humans out of the loop. Because previously, you wanted to know what God said, you had to speak with a human. Like if you're in ancient Greece, you go to the Pythia, or you go to some priestess or priest. What does Artemis want? What does Zeus tell us? And then people said, but how can you trust a human? You can't. So they came up with the book. Don't trust the human, trust the book. The book is never wrong. And humans can't change the book. And so, in a way, the text is more authoritative than the human beings. And now, when you have this kind of super text, what do? Especially when the text can talk back to you. I mean, again, one big problem in Judaism and all these religions for centuries is that you have all these questions about the text, and the text is silent. What did you mean by this? You need to go to a human again to interpret the text. Now you have a text that can talk back. And if the rabbis say, no, this is not acceptable because of that, the AI can say, yes, but in the Talmud, in here and there, it says that blah, 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 and it is acceptable. So we'll see what happens. I don't know.
Yeah, make a movie called Alpha Rabbi. I want to see it. The next question, what do you think are the most pernicious examples of, excellent use of the word pernicious, by the way, pernicious examples of witchcraft-like thinking in the modern world?
You know, definitely you look at conspiracy theories like QAnon, it's exactly the same thing. It's really remarkable when you think about, the Salem witch hunts in American history. This is one of the founding events of American history, is the Salem witch hunts, which are often credited with helping to prevent United States from becoming a theocracy because of the horror of what happened in the Salem witch hunts. And more than 300 years after the Salem witch hunts, we now have millions of Americans, including people in position of power, which basically believe the same thing. That there is a satanic conspiracy, a global conspiracy led by Satan, people who molest children and do all these terrible things in order to destroy humanity, in order to destroy society. So it's still there, and a lot of kind of tropes, a lot of kind of ideas about witches, you see them now being said about women, especially women. They were about Hillary Clinton before, now about Kamala Harris. It's, again, stories don't go away. Powerful stories that have been around for centuries, they don't go away. They're always there, lurking on the sides. Even if they were kind of pushed away, they can come back at any moment.
I found that fascinating, the witchcraft thing as well. I remember my friend Alan Moore talking about what a spell was, and he said it is literally spelling. It's the words that you place. So you go on social media and you create a rumor about someone, or QAnon or whatever, and you have taken a sentence of words and you have cursed someone.
And continuing a little bit about QAnon, the interesting thing about it, it was originally created, inspired, the movement got going with anonymous texts online by somebody who identified as Q, which is why it's called QAnon. And this was, I think, 2016, 17. At that time, there was no technology to create such texts except by a human intelligence. Bots and algorithms could disseminate the text, could recommend the text, but not create it. Now, with the new generation of generative AIs, like GPT-4, it is possible to create texts of such a level of sophistication by a non-human intelligence. So technically, the next sect to appear online based on these online messages could actually be created by a non-human intelligence. And, which is remarkable because throughout history you had all these religions claiming that they were created by a non-human intelligence, but this was never true. Now it can actually literally be true that there could be a religion on earth with millions of followers whose holy text was written not by a human being.
So that also answers the previous question about God again as well, which is... now, another nice easy one there for you. Do you believe in free will or determinism?
It's not the only choice. I'm non-binary on that question. And with regard to free will, I would say it's a very problematic idea, especially in the age of AI. Belief or naive belief in free will, why did I choose to do this, to vote for that person, to buy that product? Because this is my free will. It's dangerous because it makes us lose curiosity about how we actually make decisions, about the influences about our decisions, and the easiest people to manipulate are the people who believe in free will. That they believe that all their decisions simply, if you believe that my decision is the result of this kind of mystical free will, there is nothing to investigate. Investigation of myself, getting to know myself, relies on assuming that there is more than free will. There are cultural influences. There are political manipulations. There are biological influences, there are biochemical influences. But I decided to do this, to buy that, to vote for that person because of some genetic factor, because of some influence campaign. And for me, the key thing is be more curious about yourself, about your decision-making process, about what is really happening in your mind. If you embark on this journey, on this quest of getting to know myself better, getting to know my mind better, and after years of meditating and exploring and using scientific methods and going to therapy and whatever, and understanding that yes, there are cultural influences, and yes, there are biological influences, and yet I have identified something that cannot be explained by any of those, then okay, call it free will. But don't start with this assumption. It's especially in today's world, when it's becoming easier and easier to hack people and to manipulate people, it's a dangerous assumption that we are just making all our decisions out of free will. And we should remember that freedom is not something that you just have. Freedom is something you have to struggle for. Even the inner freedom of making our minds about different things.
Seems to me, very important what you were. I think every day we should have a moment where we ask ourselves why we believe what we believe. There'll be stories that come up and you have to think, hang on a minute, why do I believe that? Because quite often we find that, again, in arguments on social media, when someone says, but why are you saying that? And they'll say, well, do your own research. And no one would say that if they actually had the evidence. Just say, go and read this and trust it. But so that I think that's a very important part.
Maybe I'll add to that I practice meditation, and this is basically the practice of getting to know your own mind. And where do all these thoughts and decisions and opinions come from? Just sit there with closed eyes and you just observe what is happening inside you, and suddenly a thought pops up, an opinion pops up. And where did this come from? I didn't decide in advance, I want to think this thought, and then it appeared. No. And this is really fascinating. And this is the kind of journey of self-exploration. And one of the important things you realize as you do that, or at least I realized as I did it, is that the mind is just full of junk that we accumulated over the years. Like it's just full of junk. There is so much, again, hatred and fear and greed and malice that we've accumulated over the years. And we have to be very careful about it. Like we are now here sitting and sharing our minds with hundreds of people. And this is a big responsibility. And if you think about politicians who talk in front of audiences of millions, so, the words, thoughts, that something popped up in your mind, and you thought, I'll share it with everybody. And you're basically planting seeds in millions of minds. And you have to be very, very careful about, maybe it's junk. Maybe it's just garbage. And there are a lot of politicians these days that they really love walls and border guards. And I think that all people, but especially people who are leaders, they need a wall between the mind and the mouth, and a very strong border guard on that wall. And whenever these kind of junk thoughts try to sneak over the border, stop those immigrants, don't let them in.
What is your ideal parallel job if you weren't an author?
I don't know. I haven't thought about it, yeah.
next time you meditate, and then come back here and tell
I'll
everyone.
think
That's
about it.
Well, I think that's that bit where you were just talking about the junk as well. I think that's an important thing for us to understand. I remember talking to a neuroscientist who said sometimes you have a thought and you think, "Oh my God, I didn't know I had that kind of thought inside me," and it can really shock you. And he said sometimes you have to realise it's just the noise of the machinery. And I thought that's such a useful thing, that not every thought that we have
to share
has
with
to
everybody.
define us. You go, yeah, that was just the noise of the machinery.
Exactly. Yeah.
We've got 3 minutes left.
Cool.
So, well, another easy one for you. We've been talking about this. How do we control AI? Now, we've kind of been talking about this quite a lot, but in terms of for people, again, this thing that what can we do? What is the relationship that we can have? Because obviously we are, whether we want to or not, artificial intelligence is playing a part in our lives. So what are the best ways that we can try and control the way it develops?
Again, before you kind of rush to adopt, oh, I support this regulation or that regulation, the key things are understanding and cooperating. We first of all need to understand what we are facing. And, very complex to understand AI because it has enormous positive potential and also enormous negative potential, and we need to understand both. And secondly, it's not something you can do as an individual by yourself. It's only by very large-scale cooperation. Again, that's why I keep returning to the theme of institutions, because the only way to build a benign society, whether in the age of AI or in any previous age, was relying on institutions. If you try to rely only on yourself, you can't. And if you try to rely just on some individual genius, that person will solve everything, or this person is the messiah, it never works. We need, again, it's the kind of boring stuff of building and maintaining these large, complex institutions, and most importantly, institutions that can identify and correct their own mistakes. The AI revolution will develop very, very rapidly. Nobody can anticipate it in advance. So whatever your thoughts are about how to deal with it, assume that you also make errors or that there are lacunas, you don't see these areas. And this is why you need to cooperate with other people and to have these strong mechanisms to identify and correct mistakes.
It seems like with a lot of the work and the interviews I read, that ultimately underneath it all, one of the things that we must always remember is be curious, be interested, and be ready to change if the evidence that we see before us tells us, well, what I have believed, yeah, that was what I believed when I had that information, but I found new information which seems valid. But the curiosity seems to be the thing that you thrive on.
It's not just being curious, it's really being able to change. And to change our minds more than anything else. That, AI is going to develop extremely rapidly, and our minds need the flexibility to keep up with it. And I think we can do it. I mean, I'm not I won't tell you that we have an insurance from somebody that it will succeed, but we have a chance, we have a good chance. If for every dollar and every pound and every minute that we invest in developing artificial intelligence, we invest another dollar and pound and minute in developing our own minds, we will be okay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. You're all going to love the book that you're taking away with you. It will change many of your ideas and help them develop as well. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for Yuval. Thank you. There we go, Karen.
Democracies are made possible only by information technology. Democracy, in essence, is a conversation. A group of people conversing, talking, trying to make decisions together. Dictatorship is one person dictates everything. That's dictatorship. Now, in the Stone Age, hunter-gatherers living in small bands, they were mostly democratic. Whenever the band needed to decide anything, they could just talk with each other. As human societies grew bigger, it just became technically difficult to hold the conversation. The only examples we have from the ancient world for democracies are small city-states, like Athens or Republican Rome. These are the two most famous examples, not the only ones, but the most famous. Even philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, they knew once you go beyond the level of a city-state, democracy is impossible. We do not know of a single example from the pre-modern world of a large-scale democracy. Large-scale democracy becomes possible only in the late modern era when a couple of information technologies appear. First the newspaper, then telegraph and radio and television, and they make large-scale democracy possible.
It's a book about the long-term history of information networks from the Stone Age to the age of AI. The idea is to understand the long-term processes that shape information networks and to learn from previous historical revolutions about what is the same and what is different, what is new about this revolution. We can learn a lot, for instance, from the process of the canonization of the Bible, about the process of canonizing AI, the fantasy of creating an infallible information technology that will always tell us the truth and that will be able to solve all our problems. It's of course a very old fantasy in human history. And looking at what happens previously when humans follow this fantasy can tell us at least some things about what is happening right now. The book is really about trying to understand the current AI revolution from a very long-term historical perspective.